This is a quick story, but a story that you need to watch all the way to its end. It's about 4 of the most heartbreaking gaming moments in the history of my life, but there's so much more to it. There are spoilers, obviously, so watch this at your own peril, but I want you to picture this first scene. I was a young man, and I just discovered that my girlfriend had cheated on me. Naturally, I was trying to bandage the pain by catching up with another female. She was this classmate of mine, Sarah. It was 2 in the morning and we were sitting on a high ledge overlooking the city, and we'd had way too much absinthe. Sarah used to write me long letters, and I used to wonder, would she still write to me 10 years from now, even if I wasn't interesting to her anymore? If she ever chose to hold my hand, would she one day let it go for another?
You want to come home with me?
Sarah asked.
Why don't you stay at my place?
She pouted when I didn't reply.
You've had this look on your face this whole night. It's like you're here with me, but you aren't here with me. What's been on your mind? Why do you look so broken?
When the silence became unreasonable, I finally said, Aerith.
Aerith?
She asked me. I took a deep breath because she never would have understood, but it would have been cruel to only feed her with more silence. Aerith, I uttered once more. Or Eris, as I used to call her.
Aerith?
She repeated. I fell in love with Aerith the moment she gave me a flower. You see, after my breakup, I spent countless hours playing my friend's vintage copy of the much anticipated Square RPG Final Fantasy VII. Initially designed for the Super Nintendo and then the Nintendo 64, it finally found its home in the Sony PlayStation, making it the first title in the Final Fantasy series to use full 3D and motion graphics. Legends behind the series came back too, like composer Nobuo Uematsu, series creator and producer Hironobu Sakaguchi, and director Yoshinori Kitase. Set in the future, the game was about how a misfit mercenary with spiky blonde hair and an insanely huge sword named Cloud teams up with his friends to beat this bad guy named Sephiroth and save the planet. The game was so good that I was sure that the company that made it was going to keep its purity intact and never ever even think about milking it for everything it was worth. Just like the Persona series. One of my favorite characters in the game was Aerith. Her sweet personality and compelling backstory was matched by her skills in battle. She was my team's healer and she saved us through so many boss fights. I was in love. But love has a tendency to hide reality. I ignored the signs. What happened next was so upsetting, I didn't think I'd be able to pick up a control pad ever again. I saw her just praying in the water and I couldn't hold back the tears as Sarah put her hand on my shoulder.
And what?
Sephiroth stabbed her. Right through the heart. There was a silence.
Sephi what?
Sephiroth. Sarah looked genuinely afraid.
That sounds like a drug dealer name. Is he a drug dealer?
She thought for a moment.
You just witnessed a murder, David. You call the police?
No. But Tifa, Barrett and I got our revenge. We killed him by a meteor sight by the end. I killed him good. It took another 2 hours for Sarah to realize that Aerith was from a video game and she wasn't a real victim of homicide. But to me, she might as well have been.
You look so sad, all because of a video game.
Sarah scowled. I gazed at the sleepy city in front of us. Our distance from it made everything look so small. All the building lights looked like tiny fireflies, ready for me to catch them with both my hands. I don't like how some things just break, you know, I started, and how we can't just put them back together again. In video games, at least, things should end happily for everyone.
You know what?
Sarah said, putting her hand on mine.
Sometimes people will stab you in the back in the most cowardly way possible. We can either feel sorry for ourselves and play the victim, or decide to learn from this and despite the suffering, still save the world.
After that absinthe and tea-filled night, Sarah never wrote to me again. A few years had passed and I was heartbroken once more. This time I was heartbroken by someone I thought I was going to marry. We were with each other for 3 years, and as our relationship deteriorated, I prayed every night that things would return how they used to be. But she broke up with me on Christmas evening. She did it by telling me over the phone that she was on holiday with someone new. So I did what any logical person would do and booked a ticket to the Philippines. At some point I found myself in a bar called Hobbit House. As far as I could tell, no one dressed like the Lord of the Rings characters. Everyone was just short. "Psst, hoi," one of the staff members said to me. "You should cheer up. You're in the Hobbit House." "I can't," I said. "Why not?" "Because of Joel," I stammered. "Joel?" he asked. "Joel," I said. "What happened to Joel?" "Joel was killed. He just died." The Last of Us Part 1 messed me up for some time. I played the game not expecting anything. I thought the only games Naughty Dog made were Crash Bandicoot and Uncharted, which were nowhere near as bleak as the creature that is The Last of Us. The Last of Us Part 1 was sad, and many beloved characters died, but although kinda messed up, the actual main characters I controlled made it through to the end, which is just what you'd expect in any video game, right? Hope and light for your main characters, no matter how morally grey their actions may be. I mean, even Super Mario happily kills thousands of turtles every game, and we still want him to win. But Last of Us Part 2 changed everything, man. I kept away from any spoilers about this game, so when I saw that fateful scene right in the early stages of the game, something inside me broke inside. As players, we're supposed to have the power to determine our heroes' fates, but this time we were forced to watch our beloved protagonist suffer through the eyes of Ellie. We watched Joel get bludgeoned to death, and there were no buttons we could press to stop it from ever happening. You know the worst part? I told the air because the waiter had gone to do his actual job. The worst part is that the more you play, the worse you feel. Avenging Joel brought no satisfaction whatsoever. "That's where you're wrong," a stranger interjected. The stranger was an old man sitting by another table. I remember him very clearly because of the way he presented himself. He barely had any hair, and what hair remained was dyed bright red. He was with this young woman. She was maybe 18 or 19 years old. She had short hair, a short skirt, and I remember her nails looking freakishly long. She had a nice nose. "What?" I said. "If you watch the ending closely, Ellie gets closure. She forgives him. She forgives Joel. You see, horrible things happen to everyone, but you are in control because you control how you react to these horrible things. You're still a hero because you continued going, despite the harshness of reality. You're a hero because you survived the worst of life and still managed to smile and make others smile at the end of it all." Whoa. I was mind blown. After some conversation, I took control of the situation by asking the old man if he could pay my bill. Skipping to a few years later, everyone found themselves caught in a global pandemic. During this pandemic, I lost my job, I lost my savings, and I was essentially in lockdown at my parents' home. Every time we'd turn on the TV, there'd be reports of either thousands of people dying or thousands of people trying to buy toilet paper. During this time, my grandfather gradually lost his strength. Because he lived overseas, we had no way of being with him during his last days, and at some point we watched him breathe his last breath during a Facebook Messenger phone call. There was nothing we could do. We couldn't even attend his funeral. We were powerless. He was gone, and we would never be able to hold his hand again. For anyone who has lost a grandfather they were close to, you will probably understand how much I miss him right now, especially the young and quirky version of the grandfather I grew up with. The last real conversation I had with my grandfather was when he was going blind and going deaf, and he bickered to me about my grandma. To take a break from this madness, I turned to video games. One game that I saw a lot of recommendations for was this 2D pixel game called To the Moon. "Play this game," people would tell me. "You'll feel great afterwards. Plus, you can finish it in a few hours. Easy." Without reading much into the game, I purchased it and began my adventure. An indie game developed by Freebird Games To the Moon was designed by Kan Gao using the RPG Maker XP toolkit. I learned this later, but apparently Gao designed To the Moon while dealing with the questions of his own mortality brought forward by his own grandfather's life-threatening condition. Simple in design but powerful in plot, To the Moon became a global phenomenon. It currently has a 10 out of 10 rating on Steam. To the Moon is about two employees from a company named Sigmund Corp who offer wish fulfillment services to people on their deathbeds. To fulfill their clients' wishes, our Sigmund Corp protagonists Neil and Rosaline give their clients artificial memories, thereby making them feel as though they'd accomplished their dreams. Their latest client is a dying man named Johnny, whose wish it was to fly to the moon. At first, Neil and Rosaline couldn't decipher why Johnny wanted to go to the moon so bad. We're given somewhat unhappy memories of his marriage to his childhood sweetheart, River, and a portion of his memory that was mysteriously blocked. We later discover that Johnny had met River when they were children, and looking upon the night sky, they promised to meet again the following year. If Johnny were to ever forget or get lost, he'd meet her in the moon. If you haven't played To the Moon, I recommend you play it after watching this video. It'll only cost you a few bucks, it won't take up too much time compared to other games today. I won't spoil all of the plot, but let's just say something tragic happens and Johnny forgets to meet River. In fact, he forgets about her completely. But by fate, Johnny meets River again in high school and they eventually get married. However, there will be a lasting friction between River and Johnny and she would die thinking that Johnny had forgotten that faithful promise to meet her at the moon. It was during this time that the news was rampant with reports about mass pandemic deaths, anti-vaccine protests, and endless testimonials of suffering. As I ate with my parents, I suddenly found strange little tears tumbling down my cheeks. I ran upstairs and my dad followed me. "What's wrong, son?" he asked me, his fully grown adult of a son who cried like a lost little boy. "To the moon," I said. "The old man, he died, never understanding his wife." My dad was confused. "Video games, Dad," I went on. "They're supposed to help you escape the miseries of life, not make things worse for you." My dad, not knowing what to say, mumbled from behind me, "I will always love you, son. Remember that." This time, due to the pandemic, there was no Sarah to have absinthe with, or no strange balding man with red hair to pay my restaurant bill after explaining the hero's journey. Instead, I prayed to God. A few years later, lockdowns were over. Sure, during this time I lost a few friends and family members from cancer and other reasons, but everyone behaved as if the pandemic never happened. I was happily married and things were looking bright. I flew overseas to visit my grandma, who my family believed was in her final days. Apparently, in her youth, my grandmother was a strict and even frightening parent. But as a grandmother, she was perfect, man. She always laughed with us and joked with us and called all of her grandchildren on their birthdays. When my brother and I were kids, she and my granddad would take us for walks and they'd buy us cornetto ice creams, and those memories would stay with us forever. My grandmother never failed to call me on my birthday, even during years when I'd be too busy to answer the phone. As my grandmother got older, her phone calls stopped. Seeing my grandmother in the hospital bed, I couldn't help but think that she was nothing like the bright and fiery woman I grew up with. She was deathly thin, pale, and her hair, which she used to always dye black, was now cotton white. She was in enormous pain, and because of that she was incredibly high on morphine. When she finally recognized me, she smiled that sweet smile she used to give me when I was young. She held my hand and told me that she loved me. During this time I was playing this mobile JRPG called Another Eden. It was surprisingly good. It brought me back to the old Squaresoft days where I'd spent hours playing Secret of Mana or Illusion of Gaia or Final Fantasy VI. Another Eden reminds me of those games, except with modern graphics and music. And because it's online, the plot and features are constantly updated. It essentially gives you a fantastic RPG experience that never ends. In terms of story, Another Eden has a main story combined with numerous sub-stories. A lot of these stories are your typical JRPG stories where you help a person in distress by killing a monster and then receiving some kind of reward afterwards. But there was one update to Another Eden where they introduced a mining village. At some point in this mining village, you meet a sickly girl. And just like a typical JRPG plot, you have to venture the forest to find the cure. But the interesting part about the mining village is that you actually see its residents live their lives over numerous years. This sickly girl you cured eventually grows up to marry the lumberjack, and they fall in love, get married, and have a kid. One day the lumberjack comes to you with an urgent request. His wife is sick, and someone says there's a chance that this herb called the Elpis herb could cure her. Naturally, you agree to help. You find the Elpis herbs, return to her, and this is where I thought I knew what would happen. But what I thought would happen, that she'd be cured and the young family would live happily ever after, didn't happen. And you, the player, are forced to endure the grief of seeing a beloved character die. The whole town holds a heartbreaking burial for her, and while this was happening, I kept wondering, although the hero of this game can literally travel through space and time, yet he can't save this lady from dying? But there is no hope. We are supposed to confront death and learn from it, not trick the universe into denying its existence. Everyone mourns her death, and the lumberjack's boss gruffly tells him to move on as he has a daughter to raise. You'll never see the character in the mining village ever again, but you will see her flowers. The flowers she tended every day, and now her daughter tends them too. My grandmother, she passed away a few days after I got back home. Life happens, people die, we die. From dust we were created, to dust we will return, right? And there's nothing we can really do to turn back time. We all have unique fingerprints, and we are all products of our ancestors. And our dust and our bones will be absorbed by the earth, and our souls delivered to God. So I suppose there is a profound meaning to everything. Or maybe there isn't! What I do remember is this. After her death, my grandmother was visited by maybe 100 or even over 100 people. She wasn't an inspiring tech CEO with over 1 million followers on social media. She lived a simple, penniless, but rich life full of people. A life where she called all of her grandchildren on their birthdays. All of these people wept for her. They spent hours watching her at her wake, and for months and weeks and decades after her death, people will keep remembering her or living the lives she prayed for us to live.